Hey guys, so today we're going to be experimenting with what we call the splatter effect. So if you look through, if you just Google search splatter effect, you'll see lots of different things kind of like this, where we've got a person who sort of seems like if they're sort of disintegrating into a bunch of paint splatters. It's it's a pretty tried and true photo manipulation kind of concept. It's going to be using several, I would say, tools that we haven't really had a chance to kind of get into, and one of those tools is the layer mask. We've seen a little bit of layer masks, but layer masks are very powerful tools and very helpful when it comes to things like this. So I'm going to make a new document. I'm going to just go ahead and find just the default Photoshop size. You can have it whatever orientation you like. If you want to have a square, you can have a square. If you want to have a rectangle that's landscape or portrait orientation, it's fine. I'm going to have my landscape orientation 7x5, 300 pixels per inch. I'll just press create, and I'm going to go ahead and insert this picture that I have here. You should have downloaded this little file here, the brushes, the splatter brushes, and we'll show what that's talking about in a second here. But to set up here, I'm just going to bring this in, and if you want to use any photo that you've taken, or if you want to browse through some of the photos I've taken, I think I left a link in the, I'll leave a link in the D2L folder, and I'm just going to use my magnetic lasso tool just to kind of cut Mr. Wachtel out here. This is one of those things you can use this for any number of things, and I'll clean this up with the quick mask tool obviously once I get done. So pull this through. Let's go around. I'm missing a lot of stuff. Now, it's a little complicated with Mr. Wachtel because he's got his glasses on. So when you do these, you want to make sure that you include the glasses in whatever you got. You don't want to have background information still hanging out in those glasses. That'll be very distracting, and it'll be very, shall we say, unprofessional, you might call it. We want to make sure that we're going through. All right. So I'll just get my quick mask tool on here. In fact, instead of doing the quick mask tool, I'm going to use my my pen tool to finalize all the selections here. So I got my pen tool here, and I'll just see if I can't follow the outside lines, just because I think I get a little more exact with the pen tool. I think the pen tool in general is a superior selection tool than the magnetic lasso. But the magnetic lasso is very quick, so I'll just make selection, and I'll add to this selection here. Remember, when you click on the pen tool, make sure you've got the pen tool, not the curvature pen tool, and make sure it's set to half if you want to make selections. So I'll go around up here, and I'll select this here. This. Alright, I'll pull this around. Oops. Make selection, add selection. If you want to skip ahead until I have this totally isolated, you can. But I'll probably teach you a couple things about the pen tool you might not know. Alright. Okay, so let me just get in real close here, and I'll show you a little thing about the pen tool. Once you have your path made, if you hold on the control button, you can actually click on the different anchor points and adjust where they're at. Like, for instance, I click on this anchor point, I can actually adjust where this goes. Say I want it over here, and I can actually grab this little handle here and manipulate. Once again, I'm holding on the control key the whole time. I can manipulate how steep the curve is, and that's really good. Okay, so I'll add this to the selection. Make a selection, add to selection, it's okay. It's good, okay. So I'll be sure over here to come in and grab his glasses here. So I'll click here, make a little selection around his glasses. Like that. And I'll come down here, I'll do the same thing. Make a selection. Add to the selection, press OK. And then I'm going to separate the stuff, the little like reflection of the crowd behind him by taking this out of the selection. So I'll just pull this down here. Looks good. Alright, make selection. In this case I'll say subtract from selection, so that way it's selecting the area around his glasses. Same thing here. And then instead of making another path that would probably warp out of it, I'll just make a straight selection right here. And whenever you make a selection with an incomplete path, it's going to take the endpoints and draw the shortest line possible between the two. And I'll just check the selection here. And that looks about right. Okay, cool. So with that, make sure we get beard here. check. Arm. Okay. Now, you might say, okay, so we're going to be kind of making this little abstract effect on it. Why do we need to, ensure that we have a clean selection? Well, obviously, if you start with a clean selection, it's going to make it easier to have the final product be clean. So if your base stuff is clean, then your final product's gonna be clean. So instead of messing around with the background layer, I'm just gonna right-click on this with my marquee tool selected. I'm gonna right-click and I'm gonna say Layer via Copy. And I look at my layer menu. I'm just going to get rid of this base photo here. So I've got that kind of chilling there. So I'll pull them down to the bottom here, so I see everything. You've got a couple options you can do this. For instance, I'm probably going to have the splatter going from like behind him outwards. You could have like your whoever you're doing the splatter of. You could have like him in the center, or he or she, him or her in the center, with like the splatter going in every direction. But I'm just gonna. But depending on what you do, is going to affect the way you do the next step, right? So the next step is we're going to duplicate this layer here. Duplicate the layer. Never find that. I'll just make this top layer copy invisible for now, so I just have one visible. I'll make sure it's in the same spot. Make sure they start at the same spot, and I'm just going to drag this outwards. I'm just going to warp this until it goes up to like the entire screen here. I might even make it slightly taller, but not a whole lot taller. All right? And then I'll bring this this guy back into visibility, so we can kind of compare the two. So we've got the original, we've got the warped version here, the modified version here. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to apply a layer mask, the layer mask essentially allows us to make changes to the layer without what we call, it's called non-destructive changes. It's actually not going to change the pixels, but it's going to obscure or reveal different parts of the layer, right? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start on the bottom layer here, and we're going to find this little button. This is in our layers window. We're going to find this little button. It looks like a rectangle with a circle on the inside. If you hover over it, it'll say something, add layer mask, right? Click on the layer mask, and you immediately see this little white rectangle kind of appear here. I'm going to take my bucket tool, right? If you don't see your bucket tool, find your gradient tool, and then hold the button down, find your bucket tool, and I'm going to set it to black. And then I'm going to fill up this layer mask. Make sure that instead of this, which you notice here I've got layer 1 highlighted, but I don't want the actual pixels of Mr. Wachtel's photo here selected. I want the white rectangle, the layer mask selected. I'm going to fill that up with black. So this works the same way that your quick mask tool works. White sort of reveals things, and then black hides things. So now we're going to, I'll just kind of show you what I'm talking about here. If I could get my brush tool here, let me just find a random brush here, random round brush. Okay, so if you have this like brush here, what you can do is you can kind of like click anywhere, and it'll set it to white, and it'll reveal what's behind the layer mask. And you see over here these little white dots are appearing. The white essentially shows you what's behind the mask, and the black shows you hides the mask. So if I were to, like, say for instance, make this brush really soft, it would apply that same kind of change, right? You can see like the soft brush is kind of coming through. So the splatter effect comes from using a brush that looks like a splatter. There's one loaded already to your brushes menu. So if you click on your, if you have your brush tool selected and you find this little icon that shows you the size and the tip of your brush, I believe you can scroll down and you can find something called, let's see if I can find this. Let's see, you can find the very bottom of the list, Kyle's Ultimate something, let's see, Kyle's Spatter. Kyle's Spatter is basically you hold it down and it starts to create, if you hold it down, it starts to create this little speckled spatter look to it. And depending on the size will change the way it applies the spatter. So this is one way of doing it if you want to go around with different sizes. Okay. We've got announcements happening here. Well, okay, so I'll see if I can't power through this here. So essentially, I'm just using the spatter brush to create this little effect that's having it bounce around. Now what I don't want are any hard edges here, so I might take my eraser tool and change my eraser to a real soft eraser. I have a big eraser here, and I'll see if I can't kind of hide this hard edge here. There we go. That's probably good. Right. And then what I'll do is I'll get my brush tool back again, and I'll start filling in more information over here. And once again, you don't want to have any hard edges. You can probably have some towards the side here. Now in this case, you notice I can see the sort of like the outline of the chin here. I don't want that. So what I can do is I can actually click this little chain link here, and I can click on my move tool, and I can actually expand out the layer. If I have this little layer selected, I can grab my little move tool. I can kind of expand this out to where it will sort of fill in the area that's like sort of behind him and in front of him. So I actually see more of the fill here. Once again, I'm going to go back. I'm going to link these back together here. So link these back, and I'll click on my layer one, and I'll on my mask tool, my mask here, and I'll go through, and I'll go ahead with my eraser, kind of soften off the edges here just a little bit, so we don't see that. All right, so that's one way of doing this. You can use the sort of spatter brush that's there. If you don't see that, if you can't seem to find that, we can load our own brush. Let me just go through one last thing. So if you do have this, if you're satisfied with this, what you can do is you can then go to your layer 1 copy, and then you can click the layer mask. So in this case, this is the top layer we have here. Click on your layer mask, and we're going to keep the little rectangle mask white, and we're going to change our brush to black. And so we'll color our black. So we'll click on the brush tool. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller here, and we're going to see if we can't apply a bit of a mask to Mr. Wachtel's actual photo here, which kind of gives the illusion that he is himself a little spattered, that he's got his own sort of almost disintegration look to him. So see if I can't kind of run through that to kind of break it up a little bit more. I'm going to go right around the edges here, just sort of break up the edges. Keep your subject's face in view. That's always what you want. You always want to make sure your subject's face is visible. And then like the further in you get, the less you want to see of the spatter effect. You want it to kind of like recede into the side, almost like the end of Infinity War. Mr. Wachtel says, "I'm not feeling so good," right? And so we're just sort of like kind of getting this. So if we can't really get that edge of his arm really broken up here, all right? So that's good. That's good. And I'll do the same thing over here. I'm going to click on my layer 1 here. I'll see if I can't maybe cover up some of these guys here. Maybe put that little speck of spatter on the sides here. All right, that's probably good. Okay, cool. All right. So the last thing we'll do is we'll add a background. So I'll just add a real subtle gray background to it. In this case, I'll just click here, and I'll grab one gray, and then I'll grab a darker gray. And I'll just put this real subtle gray background in the back. I'm going to get my gradient tool, and I'll get a radial gradient. And I'll just pull that off from the center here. And that might be a little bit too subtle. Put this up. Make sure that it's dark on the edges. So there we go. All right, so that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to load a new brush. So I'm going to hide these layers. First off, I'm actually going to duplicate these layers. So I'll select both of these, and I'll duplicate these layers. And then I'll just hide these on the bottom, and I'll delete. So what I can do is I can just click on this. I can right-click on this mask, and I'll just delete this layer mask for now. And I'll add a new layer mask to each of these layers. So I'll add a new layer mask here and here, and I'll fill this in with black. So make sure we got our bucket tool here, and I'll fill this in with black again. So that bottom layer is obscured, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to find this. If you downloaded this Splatter 1 brushes, you can add this to your Photoshop by clicking on your brush menu and clicking the little downward pointing arrow, and find this little gear icon, and find it where it says Import Brushes. And then what you can do is you can actually find where you saved your where you saved it. In this case, I saved it under a file called splatter effect. And so I'm just going to double click on this and I'm just going to load that brush. And so what you'll see, if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see a folder that says Splatter 01. And you could click on that, and you'll see it has these little these little brushes that when you click anywhere, like say for instance, I'll click in here and I'll change it to white. If you click there, you can see it forms this little splatter effect to the background layer. And for this case, you'll want to change out your brushes every so often, just to see if you can't get a different effect. You don't want to have a repeating pattern. You don't want to hold and click and drag. You want to see if you can't. That might be a bit too much here. I'll just pull that down a little bit. See if I can't do a few more here. So splatter 5 looks like that, and splatter 6 looks like that. Pull this back a bit over here, and then splatter 7 looks like this. You gotta see what's going on here. And splatter 9, take a look at that. All right, that's fun. And then splatter 10, maybe that's a bit too much here. How about, that's fun. And then what we'll do is we'll do the same thing to the layer 3. We'll just switch it over to black, and we'll do the same thing here. We'll just click on these to see if we can't break these up a little bit, break up the look of the actual photo here. So I'll just a little splatter of paint there. 13, that's interesting. 14. And you see kind of the effect that we're going for, just to break up the sort of edge of the person that we're doing the spatter of here. So that's fun. And then we'll go back to our layer mask here. We'll see if we can't bring in some more of the background information by putting in more of the splatter. So we've got 21 brushes in this little package here. I'll switch over to white. I'll just click over here, see if I can't pull it a bit more. All right, and so that's kind of the general gist of what we're going for. We're going for a sort of breaking up the pattern of the picture that we've taken, and then we're pulling the information of it outward. So once again, I can just sort of unlink these two, and I can take my little move tool here on this, and I can sort of make this even bigger if I wanted to, and I have it fill up some of the other splatters that I made. So that looks cool, and we could even. All right. Okay, so that's layer masks in a nutshell. If you put a layer mask on, what you can do is you can then change what's seen. You can change the shape of the layer, but you'll still have all the information that you had started off with. It doesn't destroy it. It doesn't make it disappear like the eraser tool does. It simply hides it. And you can shape your layer mask, and you can model your layer mask with various brush patterns, various selection patterns, and things like that. So let's take a look at the two things we made here. I'll show you. This was the thing we made with the brush tool that we downloaded, and this is what we made with the spatter tool that was already on Photoshop when we opened it up. So depending on what you're looking for, either one might be useful. I suggest that you experiment with other brushes. If you see a brush on there that you think looks neat and you want to try a new thing, just find a photo that either you took or find one that I took, and you can do the same. You can do the same thing that I did, but obviously you'll put your own spin on it. And what we'll do is we'll just you put your name here. Or actually, we'll put like I'll put something here. So put some typography there. I'll put Run Ace. And I'll size that up here. I'll put it on 2 different lines. And I'll just make this bigger. And you can put some kind of typography on there at some point to just kind of give it a final flourish, depending on what you've got going on. So I'll just change this to white so this shows it better. There we go. I can even right-click on it, go to Blending Options, and I can add a stroke just to have it be on the outside. So it's even easier to see. All right, so and you can even splatter this if you wanted to. Okay, so that's what we've got going on there, and just can't wait to see you guys produce. So I'll see you in class.